episode 7 of the Powerhouse, where we bring to you the powerhouses in the mitochondrial world. I am your host, Brian Harman, and I gave my dear co-host the last episode off, but he's back. Dr. Phil Yeske is back. How are you doing, Phil?
I'm like a bad penny. You keep finding me. I'm well. It's here, nearly end of summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and kids are getting ready to head back to school. So plenty to do.
It's like I was thinking about this earlier today. It's like our new year for parents, right? Kids going back to school. That's the new year. I'm thinking through my own New Year's resolutions. And of course, we're trying to be mindful of back to school and how that impacts the mitochondrial disease community. Yes. I know you've been working with our scientific medical advisory board to help develop some guidance along that.
Yeah, I think we recognize that this pandemic continues to be evolving over time, and with the Delta variant really coming into prominence in the last several months, infections increasing again, breakthrough infections for those who are vaccinated. We heard some amount of chatter and anxiety in the patient community about, well, wait a second, it's time to go back to school. What are some recommendations? So I worked with our scientific medical advisory board, to I'd say adapt the CDC guidelines and be mindful of the mitochondrial disease take on that. And that's, it should always start with a conversation with your healthcare provider, because your situation is different than every other mitochondrial disease patient. So don't just listen to your friends and do whatever they're saying. You really need to address your family situation. At the end of the day, it comes down to social distancing and masking as the best weapons we have to prevent infection. And consider virtual learning options if they're available to you. But most importantly, talk about it with your doctor before you make any decisions.
Of course, all this information can be found on UMDF.org. Some other great information around there that the SMAB has shared around COVID-19. And of course, we're just continuing to hope for everyone's safety and good health as we continue to challenge through this. And, I think about that even just with our own events that we're doing at UMDF and being mindful of our current state. We're heading into the fall Energy for Life season. This is a signature fundraising program of our organization. And I'll tell you what I'm really proud of is, again, our community is stepping up despite all these challenges, and they're finding a way. We have people walking their own way. We have some folks who are able to meet in small groups, but with safety a priority as always. And boy, Phil, it's inspiring in our 25th anniversary just to recognize that has been consistent this entire time for our organization.
You're absolutely right. And I think, the take-home message for me is, how much we all want that social connection, right? To be with peers and others that are walking the same journey or, affected in the same way. And that even if it's virtual as opposed to in person, it's still meaningful. And, the fundraising follows right from there. But I'm just so pleased that we're still able to provide those opportunities, albeit virtually, to still bring segments of our community together. And boy, I know I speak for all of us at UMDF. We can't wait to see everyone in person again.
I had this same sentiment for a kickoff for the Minnesota Walk this past weekend, and was talking about the real hallmark of our organization has been being together. Yeah. But another hallmark of our organization has been the ability to pivot, right? The ability to remain agile and nimble. And of course, this community does not let us down, both from the patients, the doctors, and of course, speaking for our staff, we're proud to be in that position as well, too.
Definitely.
And as we mentioned before, kids back to school. It's a new year for parents, and particularly after this last year and a half, 2 school years. And I think about, I was again thinking about my resolutions, and I don't know about you, but this time of year, I start picking up my exercise as well too. My new thing is hitting the heavy bag. This is my new workout.
I know.
Go in there, and you've seen me in some meetings come a little sweaty sometimes, not completely professional. And I always have to warn you, but I know you're picking up the exercise as well too now.
Yeah, I have been, and I know our guest today is probably got his eyebrow arched right now as to what that actually means. But I've really committed to being more active, and I think it's just good practice. It's from a mental health perspective, physical health perspective. I spend a lot of time in this room looking into this camera, having really important conversations with a lot of our stakeholders. I wouldn't change any of that. I'm really glad we can still do it effectively, remotely. But there are times where you just need to get up and get moving. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about that today.
Yeah, sometimes the boss says, let's do a walking meeting, right? And I hope our guest today inspires us even more to pick up the pace a little bit. Today, we are talking about the power of exercise on the mitochondria, the power of exercise in mitochondrial health, and ultimately just in the aging process. That's what I'm really excited to talk about, yeah. Phil. You say this all the time. It's the one thing that's going to get all of us, right? So everyone needs to pay attention today when we talk about the role of the mitochondria and the aging process. Our guest today is Dr. Mark Tarnopolsky. He's a professor in the Department of Pediatrics and the division head of neuromuscular and neurometabolic disorders at McMaster University. He is a graduate of McMaster University and has been a faculty member since 1996. Dr. Tarnopolsky focuses his innovative research on mitochondrial diseases, muscle disorders, and other neurometabolic disorders. His goal is to discover and evaluate therapies and treatments for people with neuromuscular diseases, mitochondrial dysfunction, and other mitochondrial conditions such as aging, immobility, diabetes, and obesity. Please welcome to the Powerhouse, Dr. Mark Tarnopolsky. Mark, thanks so much for joining us in the Powerhouse today.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Great to have you, Mark.
Thank you.
Well, I have to start off most of my podcasts with a mitochondrial 101 re-education for me. As I famously say, a C+ in biology. My apologies to Mr. Miller, my junior year biology teacher.
That grade seems to be getting better every time
right.
you say it.
Yeah, listen, I've been with UMDF for 3 years now. I know enough to be a little bit dangerous, at least to host a podcast. But Mark, if we could, I'd love just to kind of kick things off of just understanding your journey from out of school to where you are now, and talk to me about how you fell in love with the mitochondria.
Yeah, it's been a long, long process. When I was in school, I almost certainly had ADHD, and the best way to treat it, I found, was exercise. Didn't know it at the time, but I think my mom and dad thought that they had a much more manageable child if I was out playing all day than if I was sitting on my butt. And so I always was interested in sports, did lots of sports. And when I finished high school, I remember talking to the guidance counselor and asking what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I like sports and activity. And she said, well, why don't you be a phys ed teacher? So I said, well, that's cool. I think that would be a good buzz. So I applied and got into what then was called the Bachelor of Physical Education program. But my grandfather was a biologist. So I also had a strong interest in that area. So I did a combination of kinesiology and biology. And when I was going through, I still thought, well, maybe I don't want to be a teacher for various reasons. Maybe I'll be a doctor and do sports medicine because I really enjoy sports and activity. But I was fortunate to do a project with a guy named Dr. McDougall, and he was doing all sorts of protein turnover stuff. So I thought, well, maybe I'll take a pause after medicine and do a PhD. So I did a PhD in the area of protein turnover, looking at isotopes and stuff, but was very interested in how exercise impacted protein turnover and protein requirements. So I did that, then went back to finish my residency. I did a year of internal medicine. And at the time I was thinking, well, maybe I'm not so interested in sports medicine. I'd rather, try and combine my metabolism. So I became very interested in neurology and went off to Rochester, New York for a bit. Took a year off for various personal reasons with the divorce and such. Worked with, my wife was doing a residency way up in Northern Canada. So I did some intensive care for a year and a little bit of neurology up north, finished off my program. And when I finished, I thought, what am I going to do? I'm really interested in metabolism, interested in neurology. How can I combine the two? So I started off for my first year actually with the position in kinesiology, thinking there's no way I can make a career out of, energy, metabolism, neurology, mitochondria. This is such a weird thing. And when I started, within the first 2 weeks, a lady came in who had a stroke and a seizure. And turns out she had what's called MELAS 3271, which refers to the part of the mitochondrial DNA where the mutation was. And I thought, aha, this is it. This is exciting. I think now I can take neurology, I can take metabolism, fuse them together, and focus in the area. So I started off with a half-a-day clinic. Fortunately now, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I'm doing almost 4 days a week of clinical practice. Wow. And it's just grown exponentially. But I've always been so interested in exercise, which got me thinking about metabolism, which got me thinking about the home of our metabolism called the mitochondria. And it's been a crazy, torturous, wonderful journey. And of course, I'm very interested still in exercise, and I exercise my mitochondria every day of the week.
I wanted to dive into that right away because I understood just from checking out some of my research on you and talking to my colleagues before we had you on that you don't skip your workouts. I love to just hear you dive in a little bit into your own regimen. I shared my heavy bag hitting stories. Phil runs. What keeps you active?
Well, I think for sure part of it's ADHD. I think, you channel it properly, it's a good thing. You don't channel it like, unfortunately, too many kids these days with these crazy phone things. Oh my God, they're just sitting there, exercising their thumbs, but that's about it. But I think humans were made to move, at many levels. And you look at your dog, let your dog sit around all day and they start eating the furniture. It's the same with kids. It's the same with humans. If you exercise, you let off steam and there's a certain calmness that comes and you can focus much better. And I think that helped me too through residency. And, when I was working 90 hours a week, just getting exercise in the morning, I didn't care what happened to me afterwards. I had this calmness after having exercise. So I think inherently there was always this, feeling that I got where I just felt so calm and happy after I had exercised that I just got into everything. I did track, I did football. I know you don't believe it because I'm a skinny little runner now. But I used to lift weights, and I was the captain of the football team, if you can believe it, in high school. But I'll never forget, I thought, hey, I'm a football player. I'm going to get big and strong and fast. But I remember on the track, I think it was in grade 12, I went out to run the 100 meters. And this is nothing negative about this guy, but I'll never forget his name, Keith Twynham. Grade 12, the guy didn't train at all, walked out onto the track. And I thought, I'm a football player. I'm going to crush this. I think I ran 13:1. For those of you who saw Andre DeCrasse just ran 9.74. Yeah. So like the slowest person in the world. Keith Twynham dusted me, ran 12:5. So my coach said, Mark, you're a loser athlete. You really need to go into endurance. I think you got good mitochondria. So back then, the cross country guys, would have old clothes on, crappy shoes. They train in work boots. And I thought, I don't want to be a geek like those cross country long distance guys. I want to be the captain of the football team. So 2 hours a day, 7 days a week, I trained, finally made it that I was a decent athlete, but nothing inherent. So then I was downhill skiing at the time too, and trying really hard to make the Ontario team and hopefully go on to the Olympics and such. But I wasn't quite fast enough, in the slalom. And again, they were saying, look, you're probably slow twitch, too many mitochondria. So you got good endurance. I said, that's those crazy stuff. I want to do it. So I had an existential crisis when I didn't get chosen for the Ontario ski team. Football, I started thinking about my knees. I didn't want to destroy them. So I took a year where I was up north working and I started running. And I got better and better and better. And I dropped 25 pounds and got into running, got into orienteering. So since 1982, I got into orienteering and running. Within a couple of years, I was on the Canadian national ski orienteering team, went to the World Championships, was in the top 3 in Ontario in cross-country ski racing, infinitely better than anything I'd ever done before. But again, was cool is that it was my natural default. So I did a muscle biopsy in a study a few years later, and they said I had 83% slow twitch fibers, which
Interesting.
explains why I had no speed, no jumping power,
Right.
but explained why, after a few years of training, I was going to world championships in endurance sports. And our type 1 muscle fibers are the ones that have lots of mitochondria. They're designed to take in oxygen and food, make energy for more long distance type of activities. And so that was just, my biological default was to have lots of mitochondria in my muscle, which made me a good endurance athlete.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to elaborate on that. So I think we all have that. We know that vibe we get when we're training for a marathon and you get the runner's high. We know that feeling of hitting the heavy bag. We know just the feel good, like you said, from working out. Can you dive into a little bit more of like what's happening on that cellular level when we are in that type of activity?
Yeah, I think we know less about what turns people on and what makes some people want to do it and some people don't. Even if you don't like it, you got to find a way. And this is, if you get nothing out of my talk, find a way to enjoy exercise, because we know that it's good for people, and we can get into our research on aging and our animal stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But there are people who derive some intrinsic benefit from exercise. I mean, everyone says, "Oh, Mark, you're lucky you get the runner's high." That's a load of crap. I haven't had a runner's high in 10 years. Maybe it's because I'm getting old, but I maybe had 3 in my life where, you get this buzz when you're running, which people say is endorphins or whatever. I think it's a little more existential than that. But nevertheless, we do release things throughout our body, which, endorphins, which can dull pain a little bit. Other things like dopamine and serotonin change. And, it certainly gives me a clarity of thought. All my good ideas come when I'm running. And certainly there's it's afterwards that I think that people really get this buzz. So those hormones, once you stop, it just feels so good. And maybe it's because it hurts so much when you're exercising.
Yeah.
But it really keeps you coming back for more and more. And it's likely related to this endogenous, and even probably people have heard of, medical marijuana, the CBD and the THC. These are cannabinoids, and they bind to specific receptors in our brain. And certainly those endogenous CBD, THCs are released, and those receptors do get activated with exercise. And maybe that's part of this, feeling good, clarity of thought sort of thing that happens with exercise. But certainly we know biologically at the muscle, tons of what's going on. And we've, poked holes in people's legs with muscle biopsy needles, studied it at the molecular level. And exercise really is the ultimate in physiology. So we stress the muscle, the oxygen levels start to drop, lactate goes up a bit, and these things then trigger the cell to say, hey, I don't like this feeling. I'm going to upregulate things so that it's better the next time. And so what happens is that as we go through repeated cycles of exercise, we upregulate, meaning that we make more mitochondria, we make more blood vessels, we have more of what's called myoglobin to store oxygen in our muscle. And all of these make the next effort seem that much easier, because our engine gets bigger and bigger and bigger, so that our daily activities are easier for us to do.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say it makes a lot of sense from an evolutionary perspective, right? That if humanity really started having to fight and claw for everything it had and being active, that this triggered improvements, and now over time we've become much more sedentary, right? So now we have to seek out exercise to really achieve that same goal.
Oh, that is no question. And there's even a great paper that was published in Nature years ago. And again, it was more of a theoretical paper about how humans likely evolved through their ability to perform endurance exercise. Right. So 170,000 years ago on the plains of Africa, as we were evolving, the sort of mitochondrial haplogroup starting from L0, sort of in Botswana, just north of South Africa. Right. And then Doug Wallace, who's a famous mitochondrial person, mapped the out of Africa hypothesis based on mitochondrial DNA. But part of it, especially if you look at Eastern Africa, you look at the incredible endogenous endurance capacity that is there. I mean, just look at the Ethiopians, the Kenyans, the Ugandans at the Olympics. They're the ones winning the endurance activity. Yeah. And they've actually shown that really good endurance capacity, you can even outrun gazelles and kudu and other animals like this if you just keep going and tracking them down, because we can sweat, we can dissipate heat, and we have this incredible endurance capacity. Like my dog, for example, who has a oxygen consumption probably 3 times what mine is, If I run with my dog in the summer, I have to be very careful that I don't kill her because she needs to cool down more. We have to
Right.
constantly. Whereas for me, I can run 3 hours in 30-degree weather. It's no big deal.
It reminds me of that great book, Born to Run.
Exactly.
You're explaining this. You think about the long distance running for essentially what I recall from that book was it was all about running long enough so that the animal will be exhausted and die that way to get the food. And it's just incredible to think about how that translates today.
Exactly. That's part of the whole theory is that if we have good endurance capacity, we've got strong buttocks muscles, our leg muscles are good. They're not particularly fast, but we don't have fur, so we can dissipate heat through our eccrine sweat glands so that we can survive, in a big plain with lots of sun coming down to eventually track down the animals. And therefore, those that were, selectively enriched for these characteristics, were the ones that were successful. Unfortunately, now, as Phil's pointing out, our society, we don't need to be active.
Right.
You can sit there and drink a Red Bull and play on your computer all day and day trading Bitcoin or something. It's
Stop
not
describing us, Mark.
It's not the best for your waistline or your longevity.
Well, I'm curious, in your opinion, just how fortuitous, how much of a pioneer were your junior high cross country coaches to be talking about the power of the mitochondria and what you see today in sports. We're on the heels of the Olympics, and you read these articles and these stories about just dialing in performance, and you're watching those races, and I forget which comedian it is. There's a joke of gold, silver, right up against each other.
Seinfeld, yeah.
Right? It's Seinfeld, yes. I'm just curious, Mark, as you've seen just advancements in performance athletics, of just the talk about the mitochondria as a part of that, and give us a little bit of insight into that, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, people for years have been trying to figure out what makes an athlete a good athlete or not a good athlete. And, people say, oh, we should biopsy people, because I wouldn't have known that I had type 1 muscle fibers at 83% of my total repertoire. It should be probably around 40% type 1 in your quad. Mine were 83%. You wouldn't know it, but I was born with that because you can't really train that. So, there's the talk that in Russia, they were biopsying kids and seeing what their fiber type was and putting them into sports. Again, why do that? A coach knows that already. So, Mr. Rutherford, my, grade 9, 10, 11, and 12 football coach knew, well, I worked hard, so we'll let him play. And, he's a decent running back until we get really to the higher levels. Yeah, he ran the 400 meters and, maybe could win in grade 9. But once people start training, he's going to get dusted. He knew from the beginning. He kept telling me, do endurance. Didn't need to do a biopsy. He just watched what I did and said, well, the freaking guy's the only one going at the end of the training practice when everyone else is dead. But, he's always going at the same pace, whereas the other guys were super fast. So all of the stuff that we do, really, a good coach can pick it out just from first principles as to get a pretty good estimate that it would correlate beautifully with your fiber type composition and your mitochondrial abundance. However, there are various things that people are looking at in plasma. What's your lactate response? How quickly do you clear your lactate following a bout of activity? And people were even training folks and poking their finger at the end of the activity to see what the lactate is to train, at the lactate threshold. So there's many theories about how to train appropriately. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what's your genetic endowment for activity, because you'll never take an endurance athlete like me and make them a sprinter or a jumper. And likewise, I think it was Florence Griffith Joyner, who I think still has the 100 meters record for women. I remember her trying to run a marathon. I think she ran like 4:20 or something. It was some incredibly slow time in spite of all of the training, because she was endowed with the type 2 fibers and not the type 1 being more endurance. So, you can take a real scientific approach, but at the end of the day, with everything I've seen, it comes down to motivation, choosing the sport that's right for your body type, and, having a good coach that sort of, brings you along. Of course, nutrition is important, obviously. Improvements in different apparel from different, shirts, like in swimming, for example, some of these new skin suits improve times. The new fly shoe that people are using now, recovery gives people an extra 2 or 3 minutes in the marathon. So I think those things are making small increments, but the most important thing is to know your physiology, which your coach usually can identify, and train to that physiology. By the same token, no single training program works well, even for 2 endurance athletes. Some people really enjoy and prefer longer duration to increase the mitochondria. Others prefer higher intensity. And I think looking at how different athletes are, even within the same sport, in terms of how they train, I think that's important for patients to know that if someone says you have to do this or you have to do that, you're wrong. What you need to do is move, find what you enjoy, because if you enjoy it, you continue. If you don't, like telling me to go swimming, I'd say hit the road.
Right.
Well, I'm glad you brought it back around to the patients. But the patient community we represent, have mitochondria that just aren't working right. Could be a lot of underlying reasons for that. The recommendations for them may not be the same for a healthy individual or someone that isn't fighting a genetic disorder. But I think your research has shown exercise has a place, right, in the overall care of a mitochondrial disease patient. Maybe you could just talk about some of your work on that front.
Yeah, so there's multiple disorders where exercise is beneficial. We tend to see weakness, like our muscular dystrophy patients, and we see energy impairment, our mitochondrial patients. Now, within a mitochondrial patient group, for MELAS, let's take, which is about the most common point mutation, we have people who come in who are just weak. We have people who come in who have exercise intolerance, but reasonable strength, and everything in between. So when you see a patient, just like a coach, when you examine them, if there's fixed weakness, we say, okay, weakness seems to be your biggest problem. Let's work to your advantage. Let's work to what's your best thing. Put them on a bike, spin at very low intensity. Let's work on your endurance and build up your endurance. Get you used to exercise, with lower intensity, spinning the wheels, and gradually the strength will come up. And then after a few months, let's add in a little bit of resistance. So it might be bands, it might be weights, etc. So start with what they're better at, get them used to it, and then work towards what they have the problem with. The same is true. For example, we had a man who had MELAS syndrome, and his oxygen consumption was super, super low. So he had incredible exercise intolerance, but his power was 100% normal. So you can do anaerobic activities such as weights where you do, 10 repetitions. You don't need any oxygen in that muscle to do 10 repetitions. So what we did is we started out with more weights with him because he was strong. After a few months, once he got used to it, and there was a little bit of blood vessel growth, a little bit of spillover activation of the mitochondria, then we titrated in and gradually got him doing more endurance stuff to then start focusing on his biggest issue, which was exercise intolerance. So I think that's one thing that's really important, is work towards someone's strength and then add in what they really need to deal with where they're really compromised. Number 2, you've got to go to someone who's going to oversee this, that knows what they're doing. Because if you take everyone, throw them into a gym and say, one size fits all, it ain't going to work. The person, and this is becoming more common with kinesiology degree programs and such, these individuals learn about mitochondria. They learn about, adaptations to different types of exercise. And if they know you've got mitochondrial disease, most of them take an interest. They work at the excellent work of Tanya Tabasalo and Doug Turnbull and some of the work that we've done. They listen and then they adapt it to the program for that individual, which is really helpful. And then the other point that's critical is find out what you enjoy doing. So when we say endurance activity and people see someone on a treadmill, oh, I hate the treadmill. Okay, well, what about an elliptical? What about a reclining bike? What about swimming? So I say give people a smorgasbord of options and they can choose what they enjoy. Because if you enjoy it, you're going to do it. If you do it, then gradually you're going to get better and better and better. So I think that's critical, because I can tell you, like even in the clinic today, when we talk about exercise in our MD and our mitochondrial patients, the spectrum of what people are doing is wide. But the one thing that's clear is if you don't like it, you ain't going to do it. So you got to find what you enjoy.
And that's everything from Flo Joe to Phil and I doing our workouts. And again, as you're putting here, as an effective therapy for disease as well, too. Bottom line is making sure you're enjoying what you're doing.
Oh, yeah. And there's no question that For able-bodied individuals who don't have mitochondrial disease, we know the benefits of exercise.
Right.
If you do moderate activity, average of 30 minutes a day, 6 days a week, you will have about 4-year lifespan extension, independent of body composition. Meaning, if you're a little overweight or not, that exercise is a big determinant of aging. Importantly, with activity as well, if you do regular physical activity, it compresses aging. What we mean by that is that you'll have a healthier, older life, and then hopefully you just crash and burn when you're 92 or something. So that compression of aging is probably one of the biggest things, because on average, if people are sedentary, you have this slow decline of disability in the last 10 years of your life. And everyone, I think, would prefer to give, and then crash and burn. Plus, you get that 4-year lifespan extension. But if that lifespan extension was still with lots of disability, some people may not choose to do it, but such is not the case. 4-year lifespan extension and compression of aging is important. Now, again, mitochondrial disease, well, do they still get the same benefit? We don't have the epidemiology to say, well, if you exercise, you're going to live an extra 4 years. And that would be ludicrous, because there's so many types of mitochondrial disease. But I think we can translate from the hundreds of thousands of people in the research studies with normal human aging to say those with higher VO2, which is oxygen consumption, which is roughly proportionate to the mitochondria that you have, live longer and live more healthfully. So that's well known. So by default, if you have poor mitochondria, which is compromising your health span and your lifespan, i.e. mitochondrial disease, improving that is going to improve your lifespan and your day-to-day, health span, activities of daily living, whatever term you want to use. So I think by extrapolation, it makes a lot of sense. And does it work? Well, there's many studies which we can rely on for mitochondrial disease to show that it does. So when we look at weight training, I remember years ago, Eric Shoebridge was talking about injecting toxins into muscle and causing satellite cells to proliferate, which is a stem cell in muscle, which is what gets activated when we do weight training. And my wife was actually at his lectureship in Toronto. He was doing some work on exercise to damage muscle. And she said, well, why don't you just exercise them? So although they'll never admit, they went back and they did exercise in one patient. They published it in Annals of Neurology, showing the benefits by activating these stem cells. And Tanya Tavasalo, then excellent exercise physiologist, took over from that, working with Doug Turnbull and others, showing the benefits, mostly in CPO patients, to weight training. She and others have also shown that endurance exercise increases VO2, which is your total mitochondrial capacity when you're exercising, which improves quality of life. And what's called the SF36, which is sort of a scale of your quality of life, that was improved with exercise training in some of her studies. So I think any way you look at it, it is the appropriate thing to do for most patients.
What's exciting you most right now with your research? I can just tell you're obviously someone who's very passionate about all this, and I imagine you probably have a couple of things that excite you, but I'd love to hear what's most exciting you around this right now. Where are we headed?
So, I mean, certainly there's been a lot of work in the exercise, and we know so much at the molecular level of what's going on. We've done gene arrays and RNA sequencing of muscle, and that stuff has always been very interesting and exciting, which we use to evaluate new therapies. So one of the things that we did a few years ago was to see whether nutraceuticals would enhance or help people with mitochondrial disease, because there's been a lot of hand-waving about what's called the mitochondrial cocktail. Right. And, people have tried CoQ10 on its own and this and that, and, showed variable results. So years and years and years ago, I said, look, I really want to try a cocktail approach of what I think are treating the final common pathways of mitochondrial disease. The UMDF grants committee didn't fund me, so I said, screw it. I use my own money from my clinical overage, and I'm going to fund my own damn study. So we did an RPT using CoQ10, lipoic acid, vitamin E, and creatine, and we showed lower markers of oxidative stress and lower lactate, and got criticized saying, well, you got to check each compound. I said, give me a break, I funded this myself. And so we did it on Q10 and showed none of the benefits. So it's pretty clear from this and innumerable other studies that we've done, especially in muscular dystrophy, that combinations are better than single agents to a first approximation. When you have complex diseases like mitochondrial disease, and muscular dystrophy, where there's multiple final common pathways, we call them, which cause damage to the cell. So oxidative stress, increased lactate, decreased flux through the mitochondria. If we can target all of these things at once, I think we're in a better space. So what have we done? More recently, we realized that in obese individuals, there is mitochondrial dysfunction. So we started with our mitochondrial core, and we added to it something called beetroot extract, which improves mitochondrial efficiency. So exercise and most other things that we give to our patients can increase mitochondrial number, but per unit, those mitochondria, certainly in healthy people and aging, they don't increase the efficiency. But in healthy people and with aging, the only thing other than exercise, which increases the total amount, that improves efficiency was this beetroot, which contains these nitrates. So we added beetroot to it, and then we added a few other compounds, green tea extract, which we've used before in muscular dystrophy, green coffee bean extract, and forskolin, which is in mint plants. Put them all together, and we completely reversed fatty liver. We reversed obesity in a mouse model of obesity and fatty liver. So we're really excited about that. But more exciting to me is a concern we had about exercising with nutraceuticals.
I was just going to ask, was this part and parcel?
Yeah. So what's interesting is there was a study published a few years ago. Ristow, R-I-S-T-O-W, was the first author, published in the Proceedings of National Academy of Science, a very prestigious journal. And what they did is they gave people vitamin C and vitamin E, and they trained them and found none of the benefits of exercise training occurred when they gave vitamin E and vitamin C, which was worrisome to me in many ways, because I was thinking, geez, is this universally applicable? And therefore, should our mitochondrial patients not be taking the cocktail, because you're not going to get the benefits of exercise? And so when we trained our mice with this new cocktail we came up with, I was very concerned, and based on Ristow's work, I thought we were going to completely eliminate the benefits, but instead we doubled the benefits of exercise. So the cocktail was as effective as exercise in reversing fatty liver and obesity, but the two together were doubly effective. So that gave me a great joy that because we could never sell this product. I would never advocate it because I'm such a fan of exercise. If I was blunting those benefits, ethically, I don't think it would be appropriate to be giving this. So that was interesting. We also took our mitochondrial cocktail core, the CoQ10, lipoic acid, and vitamin E, and we gave it to male and female mice when they were training. This was a few years ago with one of my postdocs, and it actually enhanced the performance in the female mice. Didn't affect the male mice, so it wasn't negative, which was a good thing. And for the men, it wasn't significantly positive, but the females actually improved performance. So we're trying to come up with new combinations that target different tissues from a mitochondrial enhancement perspective, starting with our core, which we've described, which is the alpha lipoic acid, CoQ10, vitamin E, and creatine, and then trying to add to that for specific indications. So what we're working on now is to really focus on different mitochondrial disorders. Leber's is a big one because we've got lots of cells from patients with Leber hereditary optic neuropathy. And oxidative stress is such an important component of the pathogenesis. So we're doing some work in vitro to come up with our optimal next generation, if you will, mitochondrial cocktail to add to the benefits, of course, of exercise.
Yeah, I think for many years we've said, we need to better understand, right, the mitochondrial cocktail. And 90%, right, of our patients, at least, based on surveying, are on some kind of cocktail. There's a financial burden associated with that, right? So there's an economic burden. Is it providing benefit, right? And is it safe? And many of these questions remain only anecdotally answered.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And so based on that, that's why we proposed doing this study. This was not just hand-waving stuff that we grabbed. Essentially, we published a paper back in 2001 looking at, the final common pathways. And so specifically, we chose the creatine to bypass, because creatine is involved in the anaerobic system, which is not affected. And it also has neuroprotective effects and various other reasons we chose it. And then CoQ10, again, component of the mitochondria from complex 1 and complex 2, feeding the electrons to complex 3. And then we wanted a mitochondrial antioxidant as well, because CoQ10 undergoes oxidation reduction events, and we wanted a redox couple, and that was the alpha lipoic acid. And then we wanted a membrane chain breaking antioxidant, which was the vitamin E. So that's why we specifically came up with it. And what's important is when people come up with a cocktail, it's important that we test them in vitro, meaning in a petri dish. We test them in animal models of mitochondrial disease, and then we test them in humans in proper studies with appropriate outcomes. Now, we've had patients on that cocktail now for over 20 years, and we checked liver function, kidney function, and of course, we don't see anything. And this was all based on randomized double-blind trials that we did years ago.
So exciting to hear you're finding that the function doubled when you examine the nutraceutical side. I'm curious the role that rest and recovery plays in any of this. Just when I think about just the trifecta of healthy lifestyles and how that might translate in our community as well to, nutrition, exercise. Boy, it seems like the one we don't talk about a whole lot is just rest and recovery. And curious what kind of intersection you have found.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting too. Now, I mean, you guys are making me reflect more on it, but there's a lot that we can learn from sport and physical activity, because when you think about it, it's exercise training, optimal nutrition, and rest and recovery. Those are the three. And humans, with disease, it's no different.
Right.
And if you, pig out on a whole bunch of junk food, you're going to, be at increased risk for obesity, fatty liver. And we know that those things feed back and damage your mitochondria. So nutrition is critically important. Timing, the quality, all of these things are important. And in mitochondrial disease, appropriately targeted nutraceuticals, and we could spend all the time talking about it, but I won't. Proper exercise, as we've talked about, starting off very, very slow, listening to your body, and gradually ramping up. But the third part of that is the recovery. Because if you take a healthy person, you overtrain them, you can cause rhabdomyolysis if you overtrain someone acutely once, which we want to avoid. You can get overreaching syndrome or overtraining syndrome in athletes if you train too much, too frequently, too intensely. And then you actually paradoxically start damaging the mitochondria and do worse, which we want to avoid. Because everyone's level for where you're going to cross from a benefit or physiologically adaptive level to crossing into pathology is different for every individual. And part of that is recovery. So essentially, if you have a really high fitness up here and you want to be a world-class athlete, you got to bump it up a little bit, but you got to take your stress levels up by exercise training close to, or maybe just slightly exceeding wherever your maximal level is. And then the body responds, it moves up a little bit, it moves up a bit, it moves up a little bit. However, even a healthy person, like a person I saw today, who took some time off exercise, went back and overtrained, caused rhabdomyolysis, and the muscles broke down. The CK went up to 30,000. He had to go on dialysis. So he went too far above that threshold too quickly. A mitochondrial patient, let's say, just for figurative speaking, their capacity is down here. Normal mitochondrial patient, low VO2 max. So when they do their activities of daily living, they're sometimes getting close to that threshold, or even walking up 2 flights of stairs, they cross the threshold, and we have patients getting rhabdo doing daily activities. So what we want to do is, where's that threshold? Let's do a little bit of activity, but not cross the threshold, give the body a chance to recover. So what we know is that when we stress, we get signals that cause adaptation, but we need time for those adaptations to occur. On average, it takes between 24 and 48 hours for muscle protein synthesis to come back to normal. And so when we exercise, we stimulate building new muscles. That's called protein synthesis. And it comes down after 24 to 48 hours. So if you hit the muscle every 12 hours, you're going to break down. You need that rest and recovery period. Next, the mitochondrial protein turnover follows a similar sort of a pattern. So we like to have at least 24 hours rest. And if someone's just starting out, maybe 48 or 72 hours rest. And as they get used to it, we gradually shorten that rest period to, they can exercise every day, but try and sort of go from doing your arms to your legs to your arms to your legs, so you're not overtaxing that muscle. As part of that recovery, sleep is important. And no one knows specifically how sleep works, other than to say that we now know that there are these genes called clock genes, which are linked to your circadian rhythm. You take a Drosophila, like a fruit fly, and you mess up their sleep. What's interesting is you mess up their mitochondria, and it seems to be signaling through these clock genes. So proper sleep is critically important. For example, today I had a young girl who has Leber dystonia mutation at 14459, and she's going into puberty. And as you go into puberty, as all of you who have teenagers know, their clock gets shifted forward. So they want to stay up later and they want to sleep in the morning. And so what we're doing is we're giving her a bit of melatonin to try and reset her clock a little bit so she has a good night's sleep, because we don't want her clock genes to get screwed up. And then she's definitely feeling more fatigued as she's growing. So more protein, optimizing her sleep to try and improve the recovery of your mitochondria. And even muscle protein synthesis, proper protein and a good sleep really helps to rebuild that muscle. So I think that's our trifecta: proper exercise, proper nutrition, and optimal rest and recovery.
Boom, mic drop. That's
Right. I was going to say, eat well, work out, get your sleep.
That's that's like you said, the trifecta right there. And the challenge is to to balance all of those things in the course of life and the challenges it brings too. But if you can do it, that's the best equation, right? To have a healthy life and aging.
Absolutely.
I was just going to go there, Phil. I think, boy, we'd be remiss if we didn't hit on the aging topic a little bit here. We certainly know folks who tune into this podcast be something they'd be interested in hearing. And we've touched on a little bit throughout our conversation, but just love some of your overarching thoughts on how this all impacts the aging process for us.
Yeah, I mean, when I give talks, one of my opening lines is, if any of you think mitochondria are too complicated or it's esoteric, look around to the person to your right and left. Every one of you has a mitochondrial disease called aging. So I know some people criticize, oh, Mark, there's lots of things that cause aging. Yeah, there are. And we know that. We're not dumb. There's at least 10 canonical features of aging. But every time I come back to it, the mitochondria seem to be at the center of that. So we have mitochondrial dysfunction, we have oxidative stress, we have telomeres, which shorten over time. There's release of pro-inflammatory cytokines, which means increased inflammation. All of those can be linked to the mitochondria. So it's very true that if you have crappy mitochondria, lots of the other aspects of aging come into play. And certainly when you look at our mitochondrial patients, not all, but some of them certainly display almost a premature aging. Certainly some of our CPO patients look at least 10 to 15 years older than their stated age, which fits with the mitochondria being involved in many aspects of aging. And other folks, like Tom Prola has created a mouse where you screw up the mitochondria and it actually caused an aging phenotype in those mice. There's many studies that have shown too that as we age, there's more mitochondrial DNA deletions. There's mitochondrial oxidative stress, which occurs. There's increase in inflammation, which all can link back to the mitochondria. So improving mitochondrial health can't reverse aging because there's inevitable things that happen, but it can certainly slow it down from that perspective. And just an example, we took 100 mice and we let half of them be sedentary in a cage. The other half had a wheel to run on every day as they so chose. Mice like to run at night for some crazy reason, probably to run away from predators, but they run at night. And what we found was there was less cancer in the mice that ran at night. We published that. There was lower inflammation. And we're about to show more data that a lot of this links back to the mitochondria. Their mitochondria are much healthier in those who exercise versus the ones that had a locked wheel, so the wheel wouldn't spin at night. And again, innumerable studies show that the same holds true for humans, the benefits of lifelong exercise.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we face is that our clinical care system is set up more to be anatomical, right? Problems with the heart, problems with something like mitochondria cuts horizontally right across all of those. And we don't really think about managing mitochondrial health as a clinical approach, at least not yet. And I'm sure your hope would be increased emphasis on that going forward.
Well, there's no question. I mean, that's why I'm interested in the area. I mean, mitochondria in every cell in our body, except for our mature red blood cells, they're there to provide energy, but they do many other things too. They regulate a process called apoptosis. They're involved in free radical generation, which is this oxidative stress we talked about before. They have a role in inflammation. So they're multifactorial little beasts, in addition to, detoxifying and utilizing oxygen and utilizing your food to make energy. They've got certainly an important role in every cell in our body, except for our mature red blood cells. And, optimizing their health as you've put forth, really, involves so many different tissues and so many clinical manifestations if they're not working properly. What's still amazing about this disorder is even within a family, for example, with MELAS mutation, some can have weakness, others can have strokes, others just have diabetes and deafness. So there's so many other factors which play into it. It's still a big unknown and something that is going to be exciting for the next many decades to keep learning and working on.
No doubt.
Well,
we still have a long ways to go.
Yeah, we're excited to have your mind on it, right? It's the whole point of these conversations we have with the real pros out there that clearly are bridging their passion for what they do with a big need in our community. This has been a really inspiring conversation today, Mark. And we ask this question to every guest that we have, and I'll assume two of them are Keith Twynham and Mr. Rutherford, but I want to know who inspires you, who are the powerhouses in your life?
Well, I mean, the important folks throughout my career who, one was my coach, Mr. Rutherford. And, I hope he's listening at some point or knows that he had a big impact on my life. And then clearly the late Duncan McDougall was an exercise physiologist. I did my 4th year project with him. He introduced me to research and got me really excited about research. He was more of an exercise physiologist, but, it really sparked my interest. And then, going through my career, Brian Robinson, which many of you might have heard of, he is a metabolic specialist in Toronto. And when I found that patient that had the 3271 variant, that was through Brian's lab, who did the mitochondrial testing. And then we became friends, and my wife went and did part of her postdoc with him. And, Brian's been a real mentor and was really part of me solidifying my early thoughts to.
I believe he was the first UMDF grantee back in like 1996 or 1997.
Really? And that's when we first started our friendship and our collaboration. Mm-hmm. And so Brian was a huge, he's an icon in the area. And I think just seeing, what a wonderful person he was and how excited he was about mitochondria got me really jazzed up. And a number of my, Johnny Parisi, who's now the Associate Dean of Science, he went during his master's to work with Brian for a while to learn mitochondrial DNA sequencing and deletion analysis. And we've had at least 5 folks go to work with Brian over the years. And Sandy Raha, who's one of Brian's first postdocs, I brought him on staff here at McMaster, and he's a professor now at McMaster. So he a real icon, a big influence. But of course, the motivation to continue is obviously my wife and my family. Jackie and I have been together for 30 years. No one will give her credit for it, but it was her bringing up the whole thing about exercising to cause damage to activate the stem cells, which got folks thinking about it. Eric Schubridge, when he gave his talk, and of course, doing stuff with my kids. You may notice, maybe not a lot. There's a few scars on my arms. I just did a 24-hour race with my daughter. So we did this crazy adventure race with 24 hours of trekking.
You said 24?
24.
Okay.
Yeah, it was crazy. So canoeing, orienteering, and mountain biking. It was evil going for 24 hours, but it was cool. It was loads of fun to watch my daughter go through and to see what humans can actually do when they push themselves. It's definitely evil doing 24 hours, but
there goes the good vibe I had with my 1 hour at LA Fitness this morning.
Yeah.
But the message is loud and clear, right? We said earlier, eating well, working out, do something, move, move. And it's just so great to hear how that can apply to the most elite athletes to, my goodness, we talk about it all the time that we're beating the drum for a disease that's an energy depletion disease, and one where our families crash and there are just real energy problems. And to know that the role of exercise, when you did your levels there, to know that can be even trained up a little bit, that's inspiring to hear that as well too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no difference between the top sport elite athlete in terms of the principles of exercise, sleep, nutrition, and patterning of your activities for an elite athlete versus someone with mitochondrial disease. It's just your level was pushed down because of your genetics. But what's great is study after study has shown that if you do it properly and you take all of the factors into account, you can improve that level. So we've had patients, for example, with MELAS syndrome. We published this back when I worked with Brian with the 3271 patients. VO2 max, which is your aerobic capacity, average was just over 8 milliliters per kilogram per minute. Now, to put that into context, as we sit here and talk, well, maybe with my arms moving, I'm close to that, but if we're sedentary, it's around 4 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And they estimate that anything less than 12 mils per kilogram per minute, you can't maintain a functional life. So you have to be institutionalized. And that's based on the aging research. The average is around 35. A top sport athlete is around 92. So what we found, though, is even those patients that were down around 8 or 9, with careful exercise, you can bump it up to 12, 13, 14. So you might say, well, that's not very much, but holy crow, that's a 50% improvement. Right. But again, you've got to look at everything on a relative basis because every little bit helps. And when you're doing daily activities and your fitness level because of your mitochondrial disease or gross inactivity is such that you're tapping out or maxing out your energy, if you can bump that up a little bit, your daily activities are going to be like this. So you're not hitting that ceiling every single day and being crashed. So it takes a bit. I know people say you're an idiot. I can't do it. I feel like crap when I first start exercising. But again, slowly that ceiling bumps up just a little bit. And what used to really trash me now, I'm able to do every day without hitting that threshold. And that's really what we want people to do, is to feel better in their activities of daily living and enjoy life.
Well, you inspire our patient community. I mean, with these words, hopefully they can consider that. I know it may seem counterintuitive, right? That I'm fatigued, I'm tired, exercise intolerance. That to move, it's what it takes, right, to make improvements. And we can't thank you enough for all the clinical care you've provided to the patient community over these years too, Mark. You've made a lot of contributions on the research side, but taking care of those patients is what we appreciate most of all.
Thanks. Well, it's certainly what we enjoy, and we love doing it. And, I'm retiring from a large aspect of my adult medicine practice for everything except for mitochondrial disease in adults.
Good.
It's the only thing that I'm going to continue with just because it's the culmination of everything I've done in my life. I would point out, though, for everyone, be careful. Listen to your body. Okay, I don't want anyone to go out and push themselves too hard and get rhabdomyolysis. Right. We've had patients with MELAS syndrome who, when they didn't know what they had, they pushed really hard. They went deaf, so they'd exercise and use deafness. So listen to your body. If you really don't feel good, back off. Hydrate well. Never exercise if you've got a fever, a cold, or a flu. And listen to your body to recover before you try something else and go back for your second bout of activity. Don't restart exercise if your muscles are still sore and achy. Give your body that rest and recovery. Okay.
A really important message as we wrap up a really inspiring conversation today. Mark, we're so glad to have you today with us on the Powerhouse. Thanks for all of your good work, everything you're doing for our community, and keeping us inspired and encouraging Phil and I go to do a second workout this afternoon. Have a great one, Mark.
What a day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mark. Great to
Oh, Phil, I'm only half joking there about that. Although, a really important message there at the end as well, too, right? Listen to your body as much as
you start to think about times where you probably pushed it a little too far. Like, okay, I can do a little more. And you got to listen to your body and, allowing for that rest recovery period, really important, too.
Yeah, what struck me was it really helped me when he was starting to do the levels with his hands there. And we're talking about kind of the training of that level on a cellular level to kind of bump that up a little bit here and there. It's just a really nice perspective.
For sure.
Well, I know one way that we can all continue to support the good work of UMDF is activating our mitochondria in a number of different ways, whether that's just being a champion for the power of the mitochondria. The Global Mitochondrial Disease Awareness Week is coming up here.
Right.
We talk a lot of these things where it's just about putting us on the map a little bit more. And I love conversations like this where, yes, we talk about the importance, in understanding advancements in mitochondrial disease, but part of our job is getting others just to pay attention to the power of the mitochondria itself.
That's right. It really, I think I've said this on other podcasts, right?
Yeah.
It's what differentiates this disease community from many other rare disorders. They're all terrible disorders, but for mitochondrial disease, we have a differentiator, and that's anything we can learn to improve the function of mitochondria in a patient who, because of their inheritance, can't possibly have well-functioning mitochondria, or there's some sort of mitochondrial dysfunction. We fix those things, learn how to fix those things. Then it's the opportunity to apply that to much bigger populations. And as you well put, ultimately every person on the face of the earth, how to improve mitochondrial function to have healthier aging and live a longer, better life. That's something I think we're already taking advantage of, and we'll see even more of that going forward. That light is going to shine on mitochondria, and our mitochondrial disease patients are going to benefit for that. So that gets me really excited.
Yeah, finding more opportunities to connect on mitochondrial function, mitochondrial health, aging, the connection to other diseases, so important as we continue to draw awareness for this disease and do good things for our patient community. The more we can learn, the better. So again, a special thanks today to our guest, Dr. Mark Tarnopolsky. Again, be sure to check us out on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of our social media channels. You can find this great content and so much more. And until next time, go fast.